For my book review, I have chosen to read Helmet for My Pillow, written by Robert Lackey and narrated by James Badge Dale. I actually listened to Helmet for My Pillow on Audible, therefore I do not have a copy of the book, so I'm providing you guys with a PowerPoint presentation of a cover of the book. This book was originally published in 1957 and was written by a World War II United States Marine Corps veteran. Lecky's book begins in 1941, shortly after the attack on Pearl Harbor, when he enlisted in the United States Marine Corps at age 21. Through listening to this book, I learned about their living conditions, how often they had food and water, and what the weather conditions were across the Pacific that he and his squad/platoon traveled to. 2. Lecky spared no detail of the horrors and sacrifice of the war, which painted an unsentimental portrait of how real warriors are made by and all too often die in defense of their country. I have always had a great deal of respect for each and every soldier who has served our country. My grandfather actually fought in the Vietnam War. After listening to my grandfather's war stories and listening to this book, the amount of respect I have for those who have fought and are still fighting for our country has grown a tremendous amount. I have read this entire book, cover to cover, every word on every page. I truly enjoyed reading this book, although I must admit I'm not a huge history person, so I did go through the book choices quite a few times. However, I am so glad I chose this book for my reading. This book truly taught me a lot about the sacrifices that these soldiers made at such young ages. They left their families, their children, their wives, their parents, not knowing if they were going to make it back home. One reason I really enjoyed this book is because it was not a hard read for me. There weren't a lot of hard historical terms that would cause me to pause and Google them so I could further understand the story. I also enjoyed this story because it was written as a narrative from a true United States Marine Corps. While reading this story, I found myself feeling like I was truly in the moment. This Marine wrote this narrative in the form of as if you were in there, like in World War II. Everything that happened, inch to inch, blood, scars, everything. Robert Lackey covered it. I also enjoyed this story because reading it from the author's perspective allowed me to see what it was truly like for those soldiers during the times of World War II. There were not one day that their stomachs were truly full. They couldn't sleep comfortably at night, not only because their sleeping conditions weren't ideal, because at times they would have 6 and 7 men to one tent, but also because they were constantly in fear of the Japanese and being attacked. Some days they would begin marching to their destination, and they could only pack what their sergeants told them to pack. At one point, these soldiers would walk 10 miles to the boondocks. Like he mentioned how they would take a 10-minute break every hour. He said during their break, they would all prop up against trees and drink water from their canteens and smoke cigarettes. However, they never knew how far their marching would be, so they must savor every ounce of water that they had in their canteens. After reading this story, I discovered how truly exhausting and tiring those times were for those soldiers who were serving our country during World War II. The only part that I could have done without in this book was the vulgar language that was used a few different times throughout the book. However, the vulgar language in this book does not reflect on the author. He was just writing it as it was happening. Unfortunately, this is just how the soldiers who were serving our country were spoken to by their superior. which is another thing that I took a notice to. Sergeants would speak to their soldiers in the most hateful and hasty ways to ensure them that they were prepared for the worst and that they received respect. In this story, certain platoons had it a little more tough than others, depending on how their sergeants chose to treat them. For example, some sergeants made their platoons march into the ocean and would not tell them to stop until they were almost waist deep or their precious rifles were about to enter into the water. Whereas some platoons, sergeants weren't so rough, I guess you could say. Don't get me wrong, judging by this book, no one platoon had it great by any means. I guess you could say some just had it a little better than others. After reading Helmet for My Pillow, I built my lesson plan around the students identifying technological advancements on society in the United States since World War II. Before Lecky left for his enlistment, he told his father he would fight the Japanese during the day and write about it at night. For this lesson plan, I will begin explaining to my students that World War II lasted from 1939 to 1945. I will then explain to my students about the technology that was available during the time of World War II and how it played such an important role in World War II. For example, major advances in weaponry, communications, and industry by both sides impacted the way the war was fought and, eventually, the outcome in the war. Radio technology played a significant part in World War II and was of such importance that some historians have claimed that radar helped the Allies win the war more than any other piece of technology, including the atomic bomb. During this lesson plan, students will begin by creating their own poster projects about the technology that was used during this war. In this project, students will also include the technological advancements on society in the United States since World War II, along with two pictures of technology that was used, of pieces of technology that was used during World War II, and two pictures of different types of technology that is used today. Under those pictures, students must provide a label for each picture and a short description of what type of technology they are presenting, along with how the technology was/is used today. Students must also create a creative title for their poster project